my dear friends. We sadly have another disturbing trend to report to you. 60-year-old woman punched in the face for video recording. What was she doing that was so deserving of the assault, you ask? The New Statesman reports that Maria McLaughlin had attended what was supposed to be an event called What is Gender? At Speaker's Corner in Hyde Park, London on Wednesday night. While waiting, she came into contact with people she describes as trans activist bullies who are protesting against the event. The now canceled event was to be a discussion of Gender Recognition Act of 2004. For those not aware of the Gender Recognition Act of 2004 is an act of the Parliament of the United Kingdom that allows transgender people to change their legal gender. It came into effect April of 2005. When the event was announced, activists including the campaign groups Sisters Uncut, Goldsmiths LGBTQ+ Society, and Action for Trans Health London organized a protest against it. You can see from a few of the messages that these groups are pretty pissed off by the people they refer to as TERFs. It says, "No TERFs on our turf." Remember that use of the derogatory label TERF is intended as an insult, which is not very inclusive in my opinion. When claiming the higher ground as the trans inclusive groups do, the moment you brand people with pejorative terms, you lose that lofty place. Sisters Uncut writes, disappointed that at New X Learning is hosting a debate that will only serve to increase trans misogyny, solidarity with our trans sisters. Some protesters encourage contacting the organizers of the event to ask for it to be canceled. This is because the speakers included the writer and self-described fabulous transsexual Miranda Yardley, the radical lesbian feminist activist Dr. Julia Long, and jewelry designer Venice Allen. They are all well-known feminist figures who are accused of being TERFs, short for trans exclusionary radical feminists, by some in the trans community and beyond, who find their views on gender threatening towards trans women in particular. Long calls trans women he, for example, and Allen's most recent tweet at the time of writing states, "Trans women are not women." The protesters argue that there was no debate aspect to the talk and therefore the prevailing message would be an attack on trans people. On Tuesday, September 12th, the New Cross Learning Center announced that it would be canceling the event after completing a risk assessment. The management committee believed the potential risks to the library, volunteers, public, and building are beyond our risk appetite, they say. Goldsmiths LGBTQ+ Society boasted of having some part in the cancellation and was celebrating their accomplishments. The next day, Miranda Yardley tweeted that the event was going to happen at Speaker's Corner, which brings us to the assault against one of the attendees. It is difficult to tell in the clip what exactly happened. There is a scuffle that involves McLaughlin in physical contact with a younger person, a piece of equipment, her camera, crashing to the floor, and then being hit in the face by a third person in a hoodie who eventually runs off. Trans activists warn that the incident could be used to claim they are violent, or that it might be described as an episode of male violence, which would be offensive if the attacker turns out to be a trans woman. I wonder why anyone would think that. The trans activists, social justice warriors, and hordes of the third wave feminists, with their newfound quasi-private army Antifa, protest the so-called violence of the thoughts and words by people they just happen to disagree with. This new trend of fighting the thought violence, or as they see it, wrongthink, with violence of their own has become a blight on civilized society. This issue of justifying the punching of a Nazi, which now basically is anyone the regressive left disagrees with, has a relative position to the stance many had towards George Bush and Dick Cheney and their justification for the use of torture. So, if it's okay to torture them, then it's okay if they torture us, right? If it's okay to use violence against ideas, then it's okay for them to do the same against us. Correct? You are lowering yourself to the standards of people you consider to be criminal and giving them in return the justification for violent behavior towards you. This is a state of affairs I did not think I'd ever live to see. George Bush and friends claimed the moral high ground with their enhanced interrogation tactics, i.e. torture, and they were rightfully rebuked by most of the civilized world. They claimed that this is what they do to our soldiers, while giving the moral justification for the terrorists to do just that. I say, if your moral high ground is the lowest point of those you despise, then you are no better than them. It's not hard to find hate on Twitter, and today was no exception. Zinnia Jones, a trans activist, says, "I hope you, too, are punched by a trans woman." That is lovely, Zinnia. What do you do for an encore? Wish for bone cancer for children? And I have almost no doubt the TERF was doing something that warranted it, like turfing. So, in the new era of enlightened civil rights, it is now justified to assault another because they have a differing worldview than yours. Nice. So, acts of violence are now considered humorous. LOL. Did a TERF get punched? Just wishing for violence is not enough for the authoritarian left. They want mindless mobs. It'd be nice if there were roving gangs of trans women beating the shit out of transphobes, but alas, this doesn't seem to be the case. These sentiments are all over the internets. Personally, I don't care if a TERF is 92 and gets beat up. Punch TERFs! And this one shows such tender affection towards the elderly. I will literally beat up a centenarian if they're a TERF. I don't give a fuck. Just makes knocking them out easier, to be honest. And of course, reporting on inciting violence against a poor old grandmother is considered snitching by this crowd. This blog post by another angry woman typifies this new distorted reality. TERFs are using Nazi tactics. Don't let it work. I have to admit that I've read this entire screed and cannot find the Nazi tactics unless this angry woman is talking about the trans rights activists themselves. It says, content note, this post discusses trans misogynistic bigots and Nazis. I guess that's a trigger warning. I feel a need to point out that this is dangerous hyperbole. When accusing someone of being a Nazi, there should be a damn good reason for it. In the 1930s and 40s, actual Nazis were members of the National Socialist Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, of course known in English as the National Socialist German Workers' Party. They actually stood for many awful things such as scientific racism, anti-Semitism, sexism, eugenics, and the outright extermination of people, just to name a few. And if you're not familiar with them, as is pretty obvious, the author of this blog has no knowledge of any history, I recommend that you read up on the horrible Nazis. But one thing they weren't noted for was being radical feminists, which is ironic since people today who are politically far right have termed all feminists as feminazis. So the third wave feminists and social justice warriors apparently now think it's a good idea to be casually branding others as being Nazis. Think about what you're doing, people. There was a hoo-ha last night where a horde of trans women allegedly surrounded a trans misogynist gathering and one of the trans misogynistic bigots got punched. A hoo-ha? Must have been a real blast. Here's where I have major problems with this angry woman. She apparently does not have the most basic grasp of history or politics or what centrism is. What I want to point out is the similarity in tactics between the trans misogynist narrative and tactics deployed successfully by the Nazis. Really? I really would like to hear about those similarities. Would it be blitzkrieg, or maybe sending millions of people off in trains to their deaths? Just what are these similar tactics? Producing currency to be used in the lands they invade to help bolster their legitimacy? Maybe installing a Nazi-friendly government in the invaded lands to manage the territory, like as in France in World War II. Inquiring minds want to know. Our current face of Nazism, the alt-right, neo-Nazis, the far-right, whatever your style guide demands you call them. I see. You got the neo-Nazi part correct, but that was pretty obvious. I mean, look at their name. But the current face of National Socialism is the far right? And do tell, please, do. What radical feminists, some being lesbians, who would likely be sent off to their deaths in Nazi Germany, not what, but how are they now the face of a fascist ideology? Rather like to play the victim when Richard Spencer got punched, LOL. The Nazis were very keen to whine about it. When anti-fascist protesters came out to defend their communities, the Nazis and their chum Donald Trump are falling over themselves to denounce violence on both sides. Centrists are always eager to back up these narratives because they love a good middle ground almost as much as they love pretending they're not enablers of fascism. Well then, so now the chief characteristic of neo-Nazism is playing the victim. If endless professional victimhood like the entire social justice warrior culture was measured by this woman's standards, they would all qualify as top-ranking Nazi officials. But I want to zoom in on this new trend of labeling centrists as Nazis, white nationalists, or whatever horrible people centrists are supposed to be. In what insane world would a person who holds moderate political views be considered alt-right or a fascist? Is this the road you want to go down? Are you so removed from reality that people that are neither politically left nor right are now the extreme? Could it be that you and your ilk are the extreme, which is closer to the truth than the nonsense being peddled on the extreme left? Look at a few tweets that confirm this violent side. Any idea where? If this is happening, I want to fuck some TERFs up. They are no better than fash. I guess they mean fascist. You are a bigot and you will get what is coming to you. Support your sisters, not just your sisters. At least that one is slightly clever. I heard a TERF got punched, so it's my duty as commander of armchair violence enthusiasts Twitter to say, good job, nice work. Keep it up. Well, it seems there is a bit of support out there for violence against women from the extreme left. I wonder if they plan to send a squad of elite Antifa to do an amphibious assault on an old age home and put some notches on their bicycle locks. It is talk like this that makes the next part of this terribly written blog more outrageous. This, of course, serves a purpose. It drags discussion away from Nazis are bad, how can we stop them, to punching is bad. Really? Are you going to make that claim? It has been a Nazi tactic since Nazis were invented. Invented, really. Hitler rather liked to claim that he and his were victims of unprovoked violence from the people they wanted wiped out. Now, forgive me if I'm starting to think that this angry woman is probably an angry child because she writes like one. You do not know that holding more than one moral point of view is not mutually exclusive. Nazis are bad is a fairly universally held proposition, as well as perpetrating violence upon another human being. So, punching someone is generally regarded in civilized parts of the world to be immoral and wrong. Not only that, but is punishable by law. You know, those little ideas created in order to protect people from criminals. And of course, if you've even bothered to watch one History Channel documentary about Germany in World War II, you likely would discover that Hitler employed tactics as an excuse to invade Poland and to annex the Sudetenland. But I hardly see the connection to feminists standing in a park wanting to listen to a discussion about gender laws as some direct correlation to invasion of sovereign nations. The balance of the unhinged blog is filled with more poorly thought out Nazi analogies and expresses a singular disdain on the rights of people to peacefully assemble. What is missing from this toxic diatribe is any mention of what these so-called fascists actually stand for. These women, yes, women, born and raised as women with two X chromosomes, something quite unique to about half of all humans. If an egg is fertilized by an X-bearing sperm, the resulting embryo will have two X chromosomes and will grow into a baby girl. If a Y-bearing sperm fertilizes the egg, the embryo will have XY chromosomes and you will have a boy. You do know that there are many kinds of feminists. It just so happens that some feminists believe that there are men who are feminine but are still men. But the hard rap for being against where trans women pee is rooted in the need to maintain the hard-won spaces that women occupy and see a self-identifying feminine man walking with his penis into an exclusive women's space as an intrusion. Many are comfortable with a trans woman identifying as trans, but not so much when it comes to calling themselves women. It is not for me to decide if someone is who they say they are, and as a man, I am not particularly disturbed by a woman entering a traditionally man's space. But you have to admit that men and women, although legally equal, are built differently. There's no easy way around that. Lacey Green tweets about this latest attack against free expression. So depressing watching the feminist conversation about gender devolve into a bunch of brats punching women they disagree with in the street. What the trans advocate community has to realize is that while you have a set of beliefs and a worldview, there are others that do not share it. This truly disturbing trend of inciting, advocating, enacting, and cheering on violence is closer to the Nazi tactics that you now endlessly whine about than the people who do not think as you do. To the regressive left, I say this about your identity politics, which is dividing humanity into smaller and smaller factions, driving wedges deep into the left and making it a far easier target for the divide and conquer tactics of the fascists. Think about it, I say to you. If you think that making enemies out of many natural allies is a winning tactic, then move forward. It worked so well for you in the 2016 presidential election. Goodbye.
Who makes the Nazis?